One of the things that the current Russo-Ukrainian war is exposing is that modern high-intensity warfare between two evenly matched opponents is much deadlier than anticipated. A recently declassified American intelligence assessed that Russia has lost 315,000 personnel out of the 360,000 that originally invaded Ukraine. That's nearly 90% casualty ratio of the original invading forces. Yet, according to Ukrainian intelligence, they believe that there are at least 420,000 newly mobilized Russian troops in Ukraine. With Russia having a much larger pool of men to mobilize, Ukrainian top commander Valery Zaluzhny believes that Ukraine needs a new technological breakthrough equivalent to the Chinese invention of gunpowder, as otherwise eventually they won't have enough people to fight. And that's where the problem lies, and not just for Ukraine. Even the US military is now realizing, given Ukrainian data, that in a full-blown conflict, the US can suffer 50,000 casualties in just 2 weeks. That's the equivalent number of casualties that the US military sustained during 2 decades of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. But what the number one source of casualties currently is in the US military, what the war in Ukraine is teaching us about the future of warfare, and why the US military is worried about their ability to replace their casualties during a large-scale war, is not what you think. As tactical vehicle accidents, even though there isn't anything tactical about a car crash. That's because pretty much any vehicle that you couldn't just buy from a dealership is considered tactical, since they have special safety and performance requirements, and that includes these JLTV tactical trailers. Now you're probably asking, how can crashing a bulletproof Humvee or MRAP be deadly? Well, when such a heavy vehicle has a rollover accident, the passengers inside are far more likely to get injured due to the momentum and force of the rolling. And MRAPs are known to rollovers are a product of insufficient training and inexperienced personnel. Other tactical vehicle accidents are often a product of maintenance failures or equipment defects. These same failures can occur on aircraft and cause the most fatal of accidents. Some aircraft fail due to the complexity of their computer and mechanical systems, like the V-22 Osprey. Since its introduction in 1989, this platform has crashed over 16 times, resulting in the death of 62 people. Following the latest V-22 Osprey crash in November 2023, both the United States and Japan have completely grounded their fleet of Ospreys. But let's keep things in perspective. Statistically, the Osprey is one of the safest aircraft in the US military's inventory when you compare the accident rate to other aircraft such as the H-60. Between 2020 and 2023, there were 4 Osprey crashes, while the H-60 platform crashed 14 times. Another US military vehicle that is grounded is the Assault Amphibious Vehicle, or AAV. The US Marine Corps permanently grounded the entire fleet of decades-old AAVs following an accident in July 2020 in the Pacific Ocean, where 8 US Marines and 1 US Navy sailor sank inside an AAV. All AAVs are currently grounded except for emergencies, and are expected to be replaced by amphibious combat vehicles. While these statistics are tragic and they underline the fact that even just being in the military comes with risks, the exact causes are debatable. Some say that accidents result from lack of training due to poor leadership. However, most experts have the consensus that it just happens. What that means is that some level of accidents and casualties are simply unavoidable when training people for the dangers of war. Suicide rates, especially among veterans, is even more worrisome, and the military is actively trying to address both issues. Before the Ukraine war, future conflicts were expected to involve small-scale, intense special operations, resembling the past 2 decades of fighting insurgents in Afghanistan. But so far, the war in eastern Ukraine has shattered this theory, as the industrial war of attrition has made a comeback. In 2023, Ukrainians started their counteroffensive with the objective of taking the village of Rabotnye within 24 hours. As advised by NATO, the idea was to use a large mechanized attack with the support of artillery to break through the front, a sort of combined arms tactic but without air support. It failed, and by day 4, Ukrainian top commander paused the counteroffensive due to the staggering losses. Instead, Zaluzhny decided to switch tactics, to use small groups of 10 to attack enemy positions. This would have been much slower, but would have saved equipment and troops. As you may know by now, it didn't really go anywhere. Similarly, Russians tried large mechanized attacks several times, in Vuhledar, Bakhmut, and most recently, Avdiivka. All of them proved to be incredibly deadly, which led to them also switching to small group tactics. The problem with small group tactics is that you're fighting for every foot of territory while turning troops through a meat grinder. In Avdiivka alone, Russians are estimated to have suffered over 13,000 casualties in just 2 months. That's 3,000 casualties for each square mile. And that's a modern war, basically a meat grinder. According to the Russian Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, as of December 2023, Ukraine has lost 383,000 personnel, wounded or killed. On the other hand, Ukraine claims that Russia sustained over 350,000 casualties. The US military estimates that Ukraine has suffered over 200,000 casualties over the past 2 years. While the exact number of casualties are kept secret by both countries, Zaluzhny recently told the reporters that his biggest mistake was thinking that the amount of casualties inflicted on Russia would cause them to stop, which it didn't. Unlike the one-sided wars America has become used to, the conflict in Ukraine depicts what a war looks like between 2 somewhat evenly matched opponents. The potential losses for both sides has been exponentially greater than the fight against the terrorist organizations of the past 20 years. These lessons have exposed a real weakness in the US military's ability to endure and replenish troop casualties. And to prepare for those potential casualties, they use what's called theater medical planners. And no, they're not the ones telling you which Broadway musical about doctors to watch. They are logistics specialists who perform calculations on the size of a unit and the number of people needed to keep the unit running at working capacity. Based on the data from Ukraine, planners are expecting a sustained rate of 3,600 casualties per day due to factors like soldiers killed in action, wounded soldiers, and those suffering diseases during the operation. Currently, planners predict a 25% replacement rate, which would mean 800 new personnel need to enter the battle every single day. Because of these frightening predictions, the Army is beginning to reconsider whether or not its current all-volunteer model of the military would work in a drawn-out war with Russia or China. To solve this, the idea of reintroducing conscription has begun to gain some traction in Washington, D.C. Ukraine, on the other hand, has already resorted to conscription. This desperate decision has led to the conscript attrition rates of 80 to 90%, according to the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian military is currently asking President Zelensky to mobilize an additional 500,000 men. Conscription earned a bad reputation in the US during the Vietnam War. And today, most Americans disapprove of the concept of being forced to fight and die in another country, an ocean away from their homes. Even for countries with a culture of mandatory conscription, the concept is a double-edged sword, because even though it provides a larger army, the army is usually less motivated and less willing to fight than an all-volunteer force who signed up for combat. It makes you wonder, who is a potential adversary that can theoretically cause 3,600 casualties per day? For the American planners, it seems certain to be China. That said, in a war against China, the main focus would be on naval and air power, since the army would likely not deploy on Chinese soil. So the focus of researchers has been on how China's military could inflict casualties on the United States using anti-ship and cruise missiles. Estimates from these simulations have put American deaths at 5,000 or more, with dozens of ships lost. But conscription would not be able to fill the gaps created by these losses, since sailors and ship personnel require months of training before being able to deploy on their ships and aircraft. It's for this reason alone that the United States is unlikely to bring back conscription, barring an all-out Third World War.